This is Nightly Business Report with Sue Herrera and Bill Griffin.
New talks. The U.S. is reportedly reaching out to China to resolve trade tensions, while businesses and farmers sound the alarm against tariffs.
Supersized revenue. Apple shows off its biggest and most expensive iPhone ever, betting consumers are willing to pay up.
Shifting gears, automakers with plants in the South are rushing to export vehicles just as Hurricane Florence closes in on the Carolinas. Those stories and much more tonight on Nightly Business Report for this Wednesday, September the 12th.
Indeed. And good evening, everybody, and welcome. Investors were reminded once again that trade matters. A report that the U.S. is reaching out to China for a new round of trade talks caused an immediate spike in stocks. These trade talks, it appears, would be high level, led by the Treasury Secretary. That helped lift shares of Boeing and Caterpillar, often seen as bellwethers for global trade. But it wasn't enough for big gains in the broader market. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed the day with just a slight rise of 27 points to 25,998. The Nasdaq was down 18 and the S&P 500 rose 1 point.
However, the threat of new U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports does still exist, and that makes the greater business community very nervous here in the U.S. Today, a number of different industries joined forces to let the White House know about their concerns. Ilan Mui has more for us tonight from Washington.
Retailers, the fishing industry, tech companies, and more. They're all coming together under the banner Americans for Free Trade to sound the alarm against President Trump's tariffs. And they're spending millions of dollars to make sure their message is heard across Washington.
It's a campaign that's directed certainly at the ultimate decision makers in the administration, but we know that there are others out there that can be influenced and persuaded. And really, it's about informing people of the real negative consequences of tariffs.
In a letter to Congress today, the coalition called its concerns urgent. It's planning listening sessions with small business owners who have been hurt by the tariffs starting next week in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. TV and digital ads are also in the works. Also today, farmers fanned out across Capitol Hill to push this issue with lawmakers.
We're really concerned that the approach taking on the trade war is going to hurt us substantially at a time when we're seeing farm income down by 50%.
The Trump administration has already imposed tariffs on $50 billion in Chinese goods. Another round on $200 billion of imports is in the works, and the president has said the rest of what we import from China is at risk too. But business leaders hope that hearing about the impact that the trade war is already having on Main Street will make a difference.
It's one thing to talk about those in a hypothetical sense, as has been done for much of the last year. It's another thing to actually have the people who are being hurt by these tariffs tell their own stories, and that's really what this campaign is all about.
Businesses hope the White House is listening. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Ilan Mui in Washington.
And businesses are expressing concern over trade tensions. According to the Fed's Beige Book, companies are grappling with rising input costs due to imposed and retaliatory tariffs. And in some cases, those concerns resulted in postponed business investment. That said, the survey suggests the economy overall grew at a modest pace or a moderate pace at the end of the summer, along with hiring and wages.
But for the first time in a year and a half, a key inflation gauge actually posted a decline. The Producer Price Index unexpectedly fell 0.1% last month as lower food prices offset higher energy prices. And despite the moderation last month, inflation overall, though, has been steadily rising thanks to that tight labor market, a strengthening economy, and the rise in tariffs.
That strengthening economy is leading to more money in the pockets of Americans. According to the Census Bureau, median household income increased nearly 2% to $61,400 last year. That is the highest on record due to the change in the way that those figures are calculated. And the poverty rate also inched lower.
We have been commemorating the 10th anniversary of the financial crisis, which spawned the Great Recession. The economy, of course, today looks a lot different from what it was 10 years ago at the beginning of that crisis. And at the depths of those dark days, three men in particular took extraordinary steps to save a financial system that some say was teetering on insolvency. Andrew Ross Sorkin spoke with them today.
10 years after the financial crisis, today we sat down with Hank Paulson, Tim Geithner, and Ben Bernanke, Three men at the center of the storm. We talked about policymaking and the policies that may have led to the crisis and those that rescued us from it. One of the things that all three men talked about was the difficulty they thought they had communicating to the public what they were trying to do. Here's what Mr. Paulson had to say.
It is very, very hard to explain that the system was so complex, so interconnected, that we had to go to the source. And Wall Street was like the heart. And we had to stop, we had to go to the heart, we had to go to the source to stop the bleeding. Otherwise, it was going to kill the economy. And what we were doing is we were putting the tarp, the things we did was like putting a tourniquet on it. But it's very hard to explain that finance is the lifeblood of the economy.
One of the other issues that was debated was the rise of populism after the crisis. Ben Bernanke took issue with the idea.
Financial crisis didn't help, obviously. We know historically that financial crises do tend to precede increases in populist politics. But people have been saying that the country's been going in the wrong direction for 40 years. There's been a long period of very slow gains in real wages, increasing inequality, slow upward mobility, social mobility. We've had rising concerns about trade, China's entry to the WTO in 2002, immigration, cultural issues. So there's a whole gamut of things that are feeding into the popular mood. I think the financial crisis obviously exacerbated that, but it was not, I don't think, the primary source of the politics that we're seeing today.
For Nightly Business Report, I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin in Washington.
After experiencing that crisis, it is difficult to think that another one could happen. But of course, anything is possible. And in an interview, the head of the world's largest hedge fund says the next crisis could be more severe.
I think that the next downturn is going to be a different type of downturn. I think pension problems, healthcare problems in terms of obligations that are not funded, that are not debt.
More severe next time?
I think it'll be more severe in terms of the social, political problems, and I think it'll be more difficult to handle.
Dalio said he believes the current economic cycle has about 2 more years to run.
Well, let's talk about this. Turn to Art Hogan to talk more about what the next financial crisis might look like. Art, of course, is chief market strategist at B. Riley FBR. Arthur, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Cyber attacks on banks, high debt levels in the fracking industry, too many subprime auto loans. I've heard those just this week as possible seeds for a future financial crisis. We never know where it's going to come from, do we?
Yeah, we really don't. And the next crisis is never going to look like the last crisis. It's like the military trying to fight the last war. We really have to look forward and see where the real cracks are. And in my mind, all of those things, cybersecurity is obviously going to be, a large concern forever because the folks that practice cybercrime are, get better faster than the people that stop it. But I think that the biggest concern in the near term for me would be the amount of dollar-denominated debt, especially in some emerging markets, if we continue to see a strength in the dollar, because that just continues to become a negative feedback loop. So we see a lot of emerging market countries that have taken on a lot of debt over the last 5 or 10 years, and that being denominated in dollars just gets worse as the dollar strengthens.
Yeah. Do you think we're ready, though? I mean, what did we learn from the 2008 financial crisis? Has it made Main Street and Wall Street perhaps more hyper aware of the fact that these crises do happen and they're different every time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you think about our banks, for example, and look at Lehman, before it went under, they had a 30 to 40% leverage ratio, and the highest leverage ratio any bank has, the most extreme, is like 10. So, to the balance sheets are stronger for our banks. So we've learned that extreme level of leverage is bad, and we've ameliorated that. So what else have we learned? I think we certainly learned that giving mortgages to people that won't be able to pay them back, and then wrapping up in a derivative investment product is a bad idea as well. I think all those lessons are learned, but that's the last crisis. I think moving forward, the things we're going to have to learn to deal with is what happens if the Eurozone starts to fall apart as an experiment. And I think that when you see things like Italy or the Brexit or Turkey, for example, so I think that things that are in front of us instead of behind us are things that we're quickly going to have to grapple with. And I think that being prepared for that means certainly paying attention to that in real time.
Art Hogan with B. Riley FBR. Always good to talk to you, Art. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Bill.
Let's take a look at some of today's upgrades and downgrades. Micron was downgraded to neutral from buy at Goldman Sachs. The analyst cites weakness in certain types of semiconductor chips, specifically DRAM, which accounts for more than 3/4 of gross profit. The price target is $50. The stock fell 4% to $41.74. Fellow chip maker NXP Semiconductor was downgraded to sell from hold at Stifel. The analyst says certain chip markets may have peaked. The price target there is $84. The stock fell a fraction to $88.80. Tiffany was upgraded to outperform from perform over at Oppenheimer. The analyst cites the stock's valuation following an 8% drop in shares over the past month. The price target is $152. The stock rose 1% to $124.74.
Still ahead, preparing for Hurricane Florence.
I'm on a pilot ship now that is responsible for getting the car carrier that you see out to sea, away from the danger of storm surge and flooding that could come with Hurricane Florence. I'm Contessa Brewer. I have more on the preparations being made in the Low Country, South Carolina, ahead on Nightly Business Report.
Was the worst performing stock in the Dow Index today. This after a company executive tempered expectations about its growth outlook. The chief financial officer cited rising raw materials costs and said automotive demand, particularly in China, may not be as robust as initially thought. The stock fell more than 2% in trading today.
As expected, Apple's flagship product is getting a makeover. The iPhone is getting bigger and in some cases pricier too. But the stock got a little smaller today, falling 1% in today's session. John Fortho has a recap for us tonight from Cupertino, California.
3 new iPhone 10s and a watch that's an approved medical device. That's what Apple announced at its biggest event of the year. For the last couple of years, Apple hasn't been selling more iPhones than in the past, but it has been able to charge more. This new lineup will test that trend. The new iPhone 10 is both more expensive and more affordable. The XS Max has a larger screen and price tag, but the new entry-level XR is less expensive than last year's model.
They're taking the size of what was an A+, and because of the way the screen is going edge to edge, you're having what is going to look like the biggest screen that they have. So this is a new effective size in terms of a screen that could induce also some additional people to consider upgrading their phones.
Apple's iPhone makes up about 60% of the company's revenue, but the world's largest publicly traded company is also looking for its next leg of growth in wearables.
Apple Watch is not only the #1 smartwatch in the world, it's the #1 watch, period.
The buzz with the new Series 4 watch, a new electrocardiogram feature. ECGs can detect irregular heartbeats. Chief Operating Officer Jeff Williams told the audience that the watch is the first to have those features receive FDA approval. Health data from the watch will be encrypted on the device and in the cloud. The new watch has a screen that's 30% larger and a new feature that can detect if the wearer has fallen and call for help. It's a growing business for Apple. CEO Tim Cook mentioned on the last earnings call that wearables generated more than $10 billion in sales for the company. ISI analyst Ross Mukin says the ECG capacity is a big deal, saying this update really establishes the company's increasing efforts to push the watch as a serious medical device. Apple hoping it also establishes the watch as a winner. For Nightly Business Report, I'm John Fort, Cupertino, California.
The TV ratings company Nielsen will reportedly consider selling itself. That's where we begin tonight's market focus. Reuters says Nielsen was expanding its review of strategic alternatives following pressure from investors and hedge fund Elliott Management. Other options for Nielsen are also being considered, including going private or spinning off parts of its business. Nielsen shares rose 1% to $26.72. Elf Beauty may also be facing pressure from an investor. The Wall Street Journal says Marathon Partners Equity Management, which owns a nearly 9% stake in Elf, will encourage Elf to sell itself or cut costs. The report added that Marathon is also seeking new additions to the company's board. Shares rose a fraction to $13.44. United Technologies was charged with violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act by making illicit payments in its elevator and aircraft engine businesses. The SEC says United Tech paid for trips and gifts for foreign officials to attract business, which is illegal under U.S. law. The company will pay about $14 million to resolve those allegations. The shares were up a fraction to $133.89.
Elsewhere, Chinese electric car maker NIO started trading on the New York Stock Exchange today. They priced their shares at $6.26 apiece. That was near the low end of the expected range, and that pricing values the company at nearly $6.5 billion. NIO, which plans to expand here in the U.S. and into Europe, says it believes it has a better and cheaper product than rival Tesla. NIO shares finished up 5% today to $6.60. Then after the bell, Tailored Brands reported a revenue miss, even as the owner of Men's Warehouse and Joseph A. Bank saw sales rise across all of its brands. Earnings were in line with estimates, but margins were smaller. Shares were volatile in the after-hours session, but finished the regular day up more than 1% to $23.94. Also out after the bell tonight, Pivotal Software topped earnings expectations and gave a current quarter outlook in line with expectations as well. But investors may have been looking for a little more. Shares initially plunged in the extended session, but finished the regular day up nearly 3% to $28.78.
Hurricane Florence was downgraded to a Category 3, but remains an immensely powerful storm. Most automakers have critical operations in the region, and they expect it to get hit. They are now preparing for the worst, but they're hoping for the best. Contessa Brewer is at the Port of Charleston for us tonight.
The preparations are intense here at the Port of Charleston as BMW moves thousands of cars onto these giant car carriers. They'll head out to sea and away from the risk of any storm surge or flooding that Hurricane Florence might bring with it. And they won't move any new cars in. The port is typically a very busy place. In fact, in August, it set records for the number of containers moved, up 16% over the previous August. Annually, this port accounts for $53 billion worth of economic activity, or 9% of state GDP.
The port is the economic engine of the state, and 1 in 10 jobs in some way or another connected to the port. So every day we're down is a day that the produce of South Carolina doesn't have access to the world market.
The real risk with the hurricane is not the wind, not even whether Charleston is the bullseye. It's the flooding, because Charleston is in low country. It floods with just a few inches of rain in a regular rainfall. And the prediction here is for inches or perhaps even feet of water. What's going to happen to those cars?
Well, those cars are being exported, and that's very important for South Carolina. That ship is leaving to get around the storm and have a safe voyage to its destination. There's actually another ship coming in to take another load this afternoon, and that'll leave tonight. And that will hopefully clear the dock so that those cars are safe on board the ships.
Other industries have shuttered as well. Volvo idled its brand new plant because of the storm. It had just opened in June. Mercedes-Benz just opened a new Sprinter factory this month. It's already closed because of the storm. Rail cars have been diverted outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Boeing has sent all of its workers home so they can evacuate with their families, and it's sending any finished 787s all the way to Everett, Washington. What's your biggest concern standing here today about the next few days?
Really, it's the uncertainty in the forecast. This storm is going to be significant for somebody, and we have to be prepared for that to be us.
The preparations continue until the effect of the storm starts to be felt here. The wind gets too strong, the seas get too rough, and then, of course, comes the planning. How do you get this port back up and running once Hurricane Florence has passed? For Nightly Business Report, Contessa Brewer in the Port of Charleston, South Carolina.
Meanwhile, home improvement retailer Lowe's is working all day and all night to get residents on the East Coast the supplies they might need before and after Florence makes landfall. Courtney Reagan is in Palmetto, Georgia, taking a look and inside the Lowe's Command Center.
Disaster prep starts here at Lowe's Emergency Command Center in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, where weather is monitored year-round, but it runs around the clock, starting up to a week before a storm hits and up to 3 weeks after. Inventory requests from stores are called in, and the Emergency Command Center plots the logistics to get the right merchandise to the affected areas, from regional distribution centers to vendors shipping directly to stores, or in many cases from one of 3 coastal holding facilities, like this one in Palmetto, Georgia, where 250,000 square feet are dedicated to emergency response supplies at all times, including 15 pre-packaged truckloads.
We get emergency response from the command center telling us exactly where the load needs to go, and at that point, we start moving the freight.
They send the list to me, I make the pallets.
Like the command center, the coastal holding facility is open around the clock in an emergency.
It's tiring, we're exhausted, the product keeps moving. It's hard to say, yes, you sleep in your car, but I have a home when it's done.
It took about 30 minutes to load this truck up with things like tarps, Clorox, buckets, brooms, anything you might need to prepare for a storm. Now it's ready to go to the stores. So far, Lowe's has sent more than 1,000 truckloads full of pre- and post-storm products to more than 135 stores in Hurricane Florence's anticipated path.
We're starting to see post-storm products roll into stores along with generators and water. I'll tell you, I just recently went through Hurricane Irma, very similar as to what we did during Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Harvey as well.
While the preparation has so far been similar to past storms, Florence has yet to make landfall. The retailer will keep its stores open as long as possible, though it's already closed its coastal stores to follow local evacuation orders. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Courtney Reagan in Palmetto, Georgia.
Coming up, the push to protect your privacy on the internet. Another executive is out at CBS. Jeff Fager, the veteran executive producer of 60 Minutes, is leaving after the company said he violated its corporate policy. His departure follows a New Yorker report that included allegations of sexual harassment, allegations that Fager has denied. As we reported, CBS CEO Les Moonves left earlier this week amid allegations of sexual misconduct.
Last month, a company called Nostrum Laboratories quietly quadrupled the price of an antibiotic that it makes. And then this week, the CEO of the company defended that move in an interview with the Financial Times, calling it a moral requirement. The antibiotic in question, by the way, has been listed by the World Health Organization as an essential medicine for basic health care systems. Well, in response, FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb tweeted that, quote, "There's no moral imperative to price gouge and take advantage of patients. The FDA will continue to promote competition so speculators and those with no regard to public health consequences cannot take advantage of patients who need medicine," end quote.
The FDA commissioner is cracking down on e-cigarette sales to teenagers. The agency today declared youth vaping an epidemic. It said it will halt the sales of flavored electronic cigarettes if manufacturers cannot prove that they are doing enough to keep them out of the hands of children and teens. But some call the crackdown not as bad as feared, and that sent shares of Altria, British American Tobacco, and Philip Morris higher.
Tech companies these days are facing growing scrutiny from all sides. The latest, this time from Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who is reportedly exploring the possibility of investigating social media companies. Well, now the lobbying group that represents most of those companies is trying to get ahead of any proposed federal privacy regulations. Julia Borston has details.
Representing the largest tech and social media giants, the Internet Association releasing proposals to guide federal privacy legislation to avoid the cost and confusion of a patchwork of state rules and get ahead of California's comprehensive privacy laws that go into effect in 2020.
It is important for individuals and certainly for startups and companies to have a national framework that avoids this patchwork. I mean, imagine if you're flying or driving across the country, and as you go from state line to state line, you're covered by different privacy protections. Your expectations as a user, and certainly for companies that are trying to innovate You can't have 50 different standards. We want to have one robust national standard that protects people.
This group of 45 companies includes Facebook, Google, Twitter, Microsoft, Amazon, and Uber. It's pushing for legislation that enforces transparency, controls over how personal information is used, consumer access to the data they've provided, and the ability to delete or correct personal information or transfer it to other companies. The Internet Association is advocating for national data breach notification laws, preempting the state rules to create a new standard for clear breach notifications. Also saying privacy protections should apply equally to all tech companies, as well as offline companies, such as retailers or credit card companies, recommending that the FTC enforce these laws at a federal level.
I think people expect to have the same privacy and the same transparency offline as they do online. Online, the tools are great and they're constantly improving, but we want the entire economy to be part of this to protect people.
The lobbying group says consumer data is valuable to help tech companies deliver a better experience, and they're working with the White House and Congress to craft rules that will protect consumers without stifling innovation. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Julia Borston in Los Angeles.
And before we go, here's a look at the final numbers from Wall Street. The Dow rose 27 points to 25,998. The Nasdaq was down 18 and the S&P 500 was up 1. And that will do it for us tonight. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Bill Griffith. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.